Washington's offensive line needs to show up and dominate against Maryland.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the program out a lot. Now, Lars, we want to make sure, because we got a really fun show coming at the everydayers today, we want to make sure we talk about some basketball. We didn't get a chance to get to it on Wednesday's show. We got some media availability with Danny Sprinkle, got a whole bunch that we need to get to there, but that team needs to make the NCAA tournament this year. We want to talk about getting Washington stars, Demond Williams, Denzel Boston, Jonah Coleman back on track against Maryland. And that kind of leads into how we need to start this conversation off, because with or without Carver Willis, Washington's offensive line needs to dominate this game against Maryland. It was a very good but very young defense.
And in a way, this is the opportunity, like you mentioned. I'm just going to take it and run with it. If Carver's not there, not saying who cares, but this is Max McCree's chance to shine. Like, this is the game. Like, if there's one game that you get motivated for, first of all, he wasn't able to get fully going against Ohio State, but he looks really good against Ohio State in his, I think it was 24 snaps. I want to say that he had a left tackle in reserve. So that should give him a running start. And then this should kind of be the game to unlock the left side of the offensive line for Jonah Coleman, where most of his runs, as we talked about, have been behind Drew Azzopardi, Gear and Hatchet, and to an extent landing up the middle, but mostly to the right side of the line. This is where you look at that front that you were talking about that Maryland has, almost in Michigan there, that they are definitely susceptible to getting, not run over per se, but you can control that line of scrimmage pretty early on. And it's imperative for Max and the offensive line to control in the first half, because if you let them hang around and if you give younger players and, guys that maybe have talent but just haven't necessarily shown it this season, motivation, or kind of, hey, we got a couple early wins, we got a couple 3-and-outs. First of all, that should not happen. But also, secondly, that's where it starts to creep in, where the games that you should win on the road, now you might lose them.
So I see where you're going with that. When you talk about Maryland's rush defense, they are 7th in the Big Ten, allowing 92.25 yards per game in the season. Where they have found success is getting after the quarterback. This freshman pairing of edge rushers in Sidney, Stewart, and Zahir Mathis has been really, really impressive so far this season. And that's kind of why we wanted to talk about just this unit in this light, is because you have, with or without Carver Willis, you have some tackles with some experience in the Big Ten. John Mills, we got a chance to talk to on Tuesday, is a guy that has been so impressive just as a physical specimen, especially after coming in at 365 pounds, as he told us, and now being in the 338 to 342 range. Having a guy like that to just establish your will on the ground is so, so important. But then, you mentioned it on the right side. Gear Hatchet and Drew Azzopardi have sprung several big runs for Jonah Coleman so far this year. And for Jonah, coming off a game where he got 13 carries, for 70 yards against Ohio State, with the long one being of 34, there were yards to be had. And with this Maryland defense, which has some really nice athletes in the front seven, I don't want to say it's going to be a trouble to find yards, but I think that Washington's experienced offensive line can establish their will in this game. And that's what we saw through the first 3 games when Washington was finding success on the ground. Because one thing we mentioned on yesterday's show, Washington has the least passing attempts in the Big Ten this season, which is just an interesting note. But you look at where they found success, especially on the ground, it's been establishing your will early and often. And with one of the best running backs in the nation in Jonah Coleman, you can throw off, even though, this Maryland front, like I said, is talented, you can throw off a young front by just establishing your will physically early and often in this game.
Exactly. And I think worth noting with Demond, he might not have as many attempts, but he also leads the country in completion percentage among quarterbacks with 50% dropbacks according to PFF. So when they throw, he's on time and on target. And I think that's to your point of what you lead with the battering ram of Jonah Coleman, Adam Muhammad. I would like to see Jordan Washington a little bit more in this game as well. This might be a perfect kind of combination for him where you're talking about another young guy for Washington taking, not overpowering per se, but he added that weight this offseason to be able to play in a game like this where you might not need him per se. But if you add, if the score ends up being, because I think the over-under is 56.5, I want to say 57, somewhere in that realm. Shout out to
FanDuel, by the way, yeah.
It was shout out to also 6.5 now is the spread. And I think when you start to add in all the pieces, yes, Maryland has talent. You look like 2 years from now when if they're playing this game, Maryland I think would probably be favored in that realm because of the you talk about those edge rushers that they have. But for now, Drew Azzopardi I think he's given up one pressure all season. I think
that's
one.
Right.
And you look, and Carver's given up a handful. Max has only given up 2. That to me is pretty telling. Where you look at that and say, you have the talent, you have the experience. Max more so hasn't played a ton, but he's a guy where he's got every reason to get up for this game. And Jonah Coleman let the nation catch up to his touchdown total. Now this is a chance for Jonah, like you said, to reestablish himself to, hey, by the way, yeah, we didn't get, going against Ohio State. God forbid the number 1 team in the country wins. Like, shocker there. But with that being said, against a team like Maryland, who is 4-0, slightly does technically have the better record than Washington, I wonder if the level of competition will have helped Washington in comparison to who Maryland faced. Because when you look at what Colorado State did to test Washington in the run game with that, 70-yard first quarter, you didn't really have that sense then. And so I think for me, those are all kind of things to factor when you think about the matchups in this game.
So I think the number one thing that I'm just kind of looking for when it comes to establishing physicality and just everything that Washington can do on the ground in this game, it's a lot of it is you couldn't get anything going in short yardage situations against Ohio State. And that was something that really did turn into a problem, as the game went on. Jimmy Doherty talked about it on Tuesday as something that, made it a real struggle in the red zone as well. But as I just kind of look at the overarching picture of where Washington's offense has found success, it hasn't just been with, establishing the run with Jonah Coleman and Adam Muhammad. It's getting DeMond Williams involved in this as well. And that's one of those things where we've seen, design runs for him in every single game, just in all sorts of different ways. And this is another opportunity for him to do that. Yeah. Maryland does have some really nice athletes on their roster, especially in the front seven, but DeMond Williams is just as good, if not better, of an athlete. And we've seen that come to fruition at several times this year. And this is one of those games where, we saw him have 13 carries for 88 yards and a touchdown against Washington State. I feel like with the way that, especially how we saw Ohio State attack this passing game for the most part too, where you were doubling Denzel Boston a lot and forcing everyone else to beat you one-on-one. I wouldn't be surprised with Maryland, who's coming off a bye, by the way, has, some time to look over that film and say, hey, this is what worked for them. Let's try that too. But, without the extremely high level of athletes all over the field that Ohio State had, that, if they try something similar, I wouldn't be surprised if DeMond Williams can, beat some of these guys to the corner. And instead of against Ohio State, where we saw some of those holes, when DeMond dropped back and then didn't see anybody open and chose to run, if some of those holes didn't close as quickly as they did against Ohio State. So there's a lot to keep an eye on there as we just, continue to look forward at what this game can be. But I think that DeMond's legs, along with Jonah Coleman, could wind up being one of the bigger X factors in this game. But Lars, speaking of, all those guys, DeMond, Denzel, Jonah Coleman, getting them back on track after some of the offensive struggles against Ohio State is absolutely critical in this contest. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how FanDuel gives me so many ways to play. I've built parlays, tried player props, and even followed the live lines during games. I even put down some futures bets as well. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Square, because this episode is brought to you by Square, and your favorite neighborhood spots run on Square. There are certain businesses that make the neighborhood the neighborhood. These are the places that become an extension of home, whether it's the sports bar dedicated to your team's fan base, the spot with the best wings in town for game day, or that beloved local chain that's been rooted in your community for years. These businesses are what bring people together. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. And when we show up as a community, it can mean big business for local business owners. Money spent in the neighborhood stays in the neighborhood. Take this ad as an excuse to go support your favorite local spot and have yourself a day in the neighborhood. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockdowncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square, see you in the neighborhood. Lars, Denzel Boston was held to 3 catches for 26 yards against Ohio State. Jonah Coleman, like I said earlier, 13 carries for 70 yards. If you want to get back on track, it was great to see Desmond Roebuck lead UW in receiving yards and catches against Ohio State. That's awesome. That shows that he's continuing to develop and can just play at a really high level. But you've been able to win games at this point with your stars. And I think for Maryland, who's 11th in the Big Ten right now, allowing a little bit over 300 yards a game on defense, this is the kind of game where you can get those guys going again, especially after, being held out of the end zone for the first time in a very, very long time.
No doubt. I mean, I think the interesting thing is there's a motivating factor here if you're Washington to, okay, you lost your big test. You lost it's not a final exam, but almost like the caliber of a final exam, where Ohio State, the number 1 team in the country, said, hey, we're here. You're going to find out where you're at in terms of that hierarchy. Now, this is kind of the floor, if you will. Like, are you at this kind of level? Because Maryland is not the worst team in the Big Ten, but UW, in terms of caliber team, when you look at just head-to-head in the rosters, you would probably take Washington over Maryland. Maybe that's just, objective bias here because we cover the team, but I don't think that's necessarily the case, because you look at, with Denzel, his ability to get open, aside from being doubled, he's always a guy that's going to find a way to get open. When you look at that, touchdown pass against Washington State, that's the example that we know Denzel will be. But when you have the caliber of defense that Ohio State does, kind of hard to make that come to fruition. Maryland doesn't have that same level, although they do have 3 guys, at different levels of the defense that are all capable and arguably, according to the PFF, better, higher graded than Washington coming into this game. That to me is going to be the intrigue, where we talked about the edges already, but when you look at the secondary and linebackers, that's kind of the back half of Maryland's defense might be where this game is won and lost, because you can establish your will up front, but those guys in the back end, can you have that breakaway? Can Jonah Coleman get into the second and third level? Can DeMond check to all 3 levels of the field? That's going to be where this game is won and lost.
So I look at it because I like where you're going with that, and it's just a matter of reestablishing Denzel Boston as the number 1 threat we know he is. And, you have to give a lot of credit to Ohio State for taking him out of the game the way that they did. But this is one of those games where, if DeMond Williams just wants to pepper him with targets with 6, 7, 8, 9 in the first half, I don't think that's the worst idea in the world. But B, I also just think it's a really great way to, I don't want to say, reestablish his confidence, because I don't think that Denzel is a guy that lacks in that department at all. But it's just something where, you just get him back in the field after what can be a very, very frustrating game against Ohio State, where you're not getting looks. And for Denzel, who knows that he can be the best player on the field at any given moment, to not give him those looks can certainly be a little bit frustrating. And I think that moving forward, if you can just continue to show that and say, hey, we're going to, you might want to double team that guy, but we're still going to try to pepper him with targets and attack you by making sure that he is involved in this game plan, can still open things up for you in other areas. And that's one of the biggest reasons that we've been discussing, a wide receiver 2 breaking out. Where does Omari Evans get 5, 6, 7 targets in this game? Does Desmond Roebuck continue to become that guy? Do you get Decker DeGraff involved in a bigger role? These are all different things that can, at the end of the day, help these guys out even more, because we've seen Jonah be such a big part of the receiving game as well through, the first 4 games of the year. And just anything that you can do to help spread the field out a little bit more and help get Denzel Boston more and more looks is also just a really important part of this game plan.
Yeah, I mean, it's why Jed, having the NFL background that he does, DeMond being 14 and 15 to start against Ohio State, even against the best competition, DeMond is able to execute at probably the highest level in the country in terms of per pass attempt. I'm not sure I'd bet on any other quarterback in the country more than DeMond Williams in that respect. And so it's the onus is on Jed to find a way to scheme Denzel open. Jed's an offensive mind. He's an offensive guru. And by the way, noticing in fall camp how much personal attention he was paying on Denzel Boston, where we're talking those simple early on first hour of practice drills, if you will, for the fans that didn't get to come out, a lot of it, basically kind of just walk through and relatively elementary stuff. But Jed, honing in on Denzel and saying, hey, this is how you do a break. This is how I want it. Make that time and those practices count in a game like this, where you absolutely should come out and win this game. I mean, yeah, Washington doesn't have the better record, but they're favored by 6.5 now, according to the FanDuel. Shout out FanDuel. And so I think, to me, that is why, again, Denzel, he can get, bracketed and all those sorts of things against Ohio State. You're a college football nerd. It's fair to say?
I would say so, yeah.
Can you name me either of Maryland's top 2 cornerbacks?
Not at the moment, but that's more of a research issue on our part.
No, but the reason why I say that is that we both, researched the team enough and knowing the edges and things like that. But there's no clear Denzel versus this guy. Denzel should be reemerging. Jonah should be reemerging against that inside defensive front. You just kind of have to counter the edges. And so the reason why I asked that question is just not to put you on the spot, but it's Denzel is the marquee name in this matchup. DeMond is the marquee quarterback.
I think that's fair.
Jonah is the marquee running back. Certainly the marquee running back when your other 2 running backs combined for Maryland have 2 touchdowns. So for me, it's just a matter of let the game come to you. Don't try and overthink it, because we know Jed pretty well at this point. That is his issue. Overthinking it too much to where you think one thing and it's, wow, I was way wrong on that, or I was so right that the other team actually knew it and countered it even before I even thought of it. That's the problem. You have the horses, just let them run free.
So I think this is one of those things where we've seen it at different points this season. It's a quick rhythm passing game that can really just do this at a very high level, because Maryland is tied for 6th in the country with 16 sacks already this season. And we've talked about these edge rushers and what they do bring to the table. And I think that while I do have faith in Washington's offensive line, which is why we wanted to just kind of start with, what that group is going to look like in this game, I think that there's still going to be an element of you show that a little bit of respect early on in the contest with, probably a couple of scripted plays of just quick slants and timing routes to get the ball out of DeMond's hands rather quickly. And it's just, that's one great way to counter a pass rush, is making sure the ball just isn't in your hands. They don't have a lot of room to operate. I look at, and that's kind of why I want to come back to this number 2 receiver point for a second, because if other people are doing that, it's just going to make it so much easier for Denzel to have some of these opportunities as well. And I'm excited about what the future of this passing game is going to look like, because I think that there's just so many different receivers that are continuing to grow and continuing to step up. And it's unfortunate that Rasheed Williams is probably out for another 3 to 4 weeks. I feel like it's fair to say, with his collarbone injury, that you're still just kind of searching for whoever that person is going to be. And if it does have to be a different person every single week, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, especially when you consider that a lot of these guys are going to be back next season working with DeMond Williams. So if all of a sudden, Raiden Vinesbray is the guy who steps up and has, let's just say it's 5 catches for 60, 65 yards in this game, you're more than happy with that, because that's just another person who, with the speed to break away at any point for a 40, 50 yard gain, you're going to have to respect that. And you're going to have to tilt coverages over there. If, let's say, he gets 2-3 catches on a drive, all of a sudden that does open more things up for Denzel. And that's a really big way to get him back on track, is just having somebody else become the focus of the defense. And that's why it's so great to have somebody like Jonah Coleman in the backfield. And after getting just 13 carries in this game against Ohio State, you can also do that at a really high level, is just get him involved early and often. And we know what it looks like for Jonah as the game continues to go on. And when he gets upfield and when he can just, get into the second and third levels of the defense, as you said, we know what kind of tackle breaker he is. And this is a game where, PFF can go back and do the numbers. If he has 7-8 missed tackles forced by the end of this contest, I'm not going to be shocked.
No, I wouldn't be at all. And I think, also, that's another thing that kind of surprised me, speaking of going through numbers, is his yards after contact and missed tackles is not what I expected. But I think that was, again, more of the numbers, what we talked about coming into the season. Just, they're not going to be as much maybe as you would normally think, but his efficiency is still the same. And I think that's where it's not a matter of, if Jonah finishes this game with 14 carries, 15 carries, I think I'm okay with that. It's what is the yards per attempt? What is the yards per run? That's going to be where it's key. If Jonah is able to get 4, 5, 6 yards certainly in the first half, that's going to be where when you're imposing your will, you're able to get back on track. The offensive line is proven that they can check that box and they can travel on the road. And you already done it once this season. You just got to go way farther east this time to do it.
No, I absolutely agree. And, a good running game and a good offensive line, those are things that can travel really well. And I think that's one of the reasons we saw this team struggle so much on the road last season were those just deficiencies on both sides of the trenches, but especially the offensive line, the way it got overwhelmed in several of those contests. But Lars, it's time to switch gears here a little bit and get excited for basketball because this is a team that needs to make the tournament. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Mazda, because Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details, and Mazda brings the same attention to how we craft every model. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And with all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Game Time, because college football is back and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You can pull up Game Time and in just a couple of taps find amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. And the app makes it super simple. You can even see the exact view from your seat before buying. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Lars, we got a chance to chat with Danny Sprinkle on Tuesday and watch about an hour of practice. It was really great to see, but unfortunately, some injury news right off the top. Florida State transfer Christian Nitu, one of the members of the front court that Danny Sprinkle brought in out of the transfer portal, is going to be missing a week or two with a foot injury, or a toe injury, excuse me. He was in a walking boot when we saw him on the sideline, and Matty Traore, the junior college transfer, was right next to him and also in a boot on one of those scooters. He is out for the season. As Danny Sprinkle said, he suffered a tendon injury in his foot. So that's really unfortunate, because that's a blow to this front court depth that you and I are really excited about. And Danny said that he might be just the best athlete on the team, the way he can run and jump and everything like that, being close to 7 feet tall and as long as he is as well. This is a guy who I was expecting to be part of this front court rotation. I don't think it's necessarily a death blow to the group like we saw with the Chris Conway injury last year, because this is just a much better, much deeper roster than we saw at any point last year when Danny Sprinkle saying they could run 9, potentially 10 deep. I feel like this group has enough talent as well to make it back to the NCAA tournament this year.
Yeah, I mean, the NCAA tournament should be the floor. Like, just flat out with the investment, the resources available that Danny has put into this team. You look at it, I think, with Lathan Somerville, Jacob Martinsevich, Frank Hepnong, you run through the guys in the front court, you have enough bodies there to make that work. It's just a matter of, with Christian Nitu, I don't, if he factors in this season, we'll be curious to see what role that ends up being. But Matty was the guy where you look at him probably as that second, third guy off the bench in terms of the front court, depending on what you want to do matchup-wise on certain teams. But you at least still have the overarching starting depth or starting, players that are still healthy, and you're not necessarily taking huge, but it is a hit. Like, it's worth noting that.
Sure.
This just, for me, kind of puts more onus on Somerville to make that emergence that Casey Ibekwe didn't last season, shall we say, where we thought he might play more of a role last season. And then, coming from Oregon State, he had that power forward experience, and it just never seemed to come to fruition for one reason or another. And so I think this is Danny understanding, okay, instead of going and getting a guy from the West Coast, let's go and get a Big Ten guy. You played at Rutgers, obviously has that experience, and say, you know what, now I can kind of trust this a little bit more. And that's why Danny doesn't go just 10. It's you fill out the entire roster, because I think you can have, 16 now, I want to say. And you look at 15 or 16. And so that's why Danny went and checked all those boxes, because if you lose a guy Like, again, this is it. Like, Danny.
Sure.
It's not to say that's it for Danny. 1 and 2 and done. But that's the way Danny thinks. That's the way Danny operates. Is he's like, hey, I missed the tournament once. I'm not missing it again.
So I'm intrigued with the Ibekwe comp that you make there, because I think that's one of the things where when we didn't see him a lot, like early in the season, especially with what he was touted as being coming in as a defender and everything, Danny saying that, oh yeah, I didn't like the matchup because they like to spread the floor a little bit. That's not an issue you're going to have with Lathan Somerville, because he's Danny loves to use the term fast twitch as an athlete. He's one of those fast twitch athletes who can guard a little bit more playing at the 4 out on the perimeter, which was something that we just didn't see KC do very well last season. But I kind of want to turn our attention here to the backcourt, because this is where I don't want to say I think games are won and lost, but I think it's just where we've seen the most improvement, because seeing the bodies in the front court is great. But having, a healthy Frank Kepnang, having Hannes Steinbach come in and, just do whatever it is that he's going to do, with how excited this whole coaching staff seems to feel about him. And I know you and I are in the same light as well with one of the things Danny mentioned with him on Tuesday is that he makes the right basketball play 99% of the time. And for an incoming true freshman, that's already really impressive, but knowing that he's done that for so long, playing professionally overseas, is a really important note to just make in that department as well. But I look at this backcourt, and it's not just, the younger guys you're going to have coming off the bench, with Cortland Mulderew, who's got a really high ceiling, JJ Mandiquit being the old school throwback point guard, as Danny Sprinkle says every single time he talks about him. And a guy like Zoom Diallo, who's going to be a little bit more flexible this year, play a little bit more off the ball, but also just still be that on ball point guard when you need him to be. You've got the veterans too, who can shoot it at a really high clip. Quimari Peterson, Wesley Yates, both guys shot over 40% for the season from beyond the arc last year. And a guy like Desmond Claude too, who can stretch you out and play on the wing, shoot it a little bit. I know he's not nearly as consistent from deep, but a guy who can get to the rim with such ease and defend at a high level. Having that trio right there as your starters in the backcourt is, I think, as good as it gets in the Big Ten. And that unit can really carry Washington a long way this season.
Not only can it carry them, it can do a number of different things. And I think that's why it was so imperative that they go and get Desmond Claude at the end of the, kind of transfer portal window, if you want to call it that, because you like Wesley Yates, you like Zoom Diallo, you like Quimari Peterson, but add one more guy, check every single box. And that's why I kind of, carrying off what I was saying earlier, don't put a reason why you can't make the tournament. Don't have it be, oh, we should have got one more guy. Had we done this? Hindsight is this. It's like Danny doesn't look in hindsight, because Danny doesn't think that way. Danny thinks in the sense of, what can I do to put myself in the best position to be coaching these guys in the NCAA tournament? And that's where getting those 4 guards makes such a difference.
So, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I think one thing that's important to note is those were things he was saying last season. And he kind of had every right to, with the way the season went out, with when he got hired and what he had to choose from in the transfer portal. I think with the way this roster is constructed, and the way, because he constructed this roster, with the way he's done that, those excuses are out the window. And I think he knows that, which is really important to note in just kind of in this scenario, because you look at just what you have in the backcourt and you combine that with a couple of guys who can score it in the front court if need be. There's so much talent up and down this roster. A name we didn't even mention yet, who I think could fit in this rotation really, really well on both sides, is Bryson Tucker, former 5-star recruit, McDonald's All-American, who came over from Indiana. Like, there's so many different guys where Danny said he's got such a tremendous ceiling as a defender, and it's about giving that effort 100% of the time. So I'm curious to see how he might fit into this rotation as well. But as we just kind of continue to look towards what this team can be and what this roster can be, I'm really curious to see what they're going to do when they, encounter some adversity. And I asked Danny about that on Tuesday, and he gave me a really great answer saying, we took practice on Saturday off because we wanted to go to the football game and kind of take in that atmosphere. And he said, we had a really bad practice on Sunday. And the way we've responded, the way we bounced back on Monday and Tuesday has been awesome. And I think that was something where we look back at last year's team and you look at the start that they got off to on some of those road games, Michigan State being the ones that really, really stand out. And they didn't always handle adversity in the best way. And, in basketball, just being the game of runs that it is, all of a sudden, if you don't handle adversity really well, you look up and against that really good Michigan State team last year, you're down 30 points with like 6 minutes to go in the first half. It's insane. I don't think that this team is going to have that same just set of issues this year.
No, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think that's even a question at this point. Now it all has to come together, and that's kind of the interesting part about how the basketball schedule and window works over the summer, where you only get, I think, what Danny said, 20 hours a week, 10 hours, something at the summer between 10 and 20 hours a week to work with the players up until a certain point. And that is, I think, a different discussion for a different day. But that's why with all these pieces, and especially the veteran pieces, that's kind of the key here. Is you talk about JJ Mandiquit, Cortland Mulder, the freshman guys that are coming in. Those are guys going to be great. And don't get me wrong, they'll probably both play it to some degree this season, JJ more so, I think, at the end of the day. But getting those veterans, having Desmond Claude come back for one more season, Wesley Yates having another year in college basketball, and then even Jacob Agnesevich, the guys in the front court as well.
Yeah.
Having all those different types of pieces allow you to say, depending on what school we're matching up with, whether it's in the non-conference or in the Big Ten schedule, we feel confident that we can do that. We're not going to win every game, but we should feel great going into every single game that we have the ability to win, which Danny flat out just did not have last season. And that was for one reason or another. Like you mentioned, part of it was when he was hired. But a lot of it, I think, kind of even the guys that he did end up getting, it was, hey, we're just kind of taking a shot in the dark and hoping that it works. And that kind of came to fruition where DJ Davis was cold, then hot, then cold, then hot. Trying to think of Lucas Courtwright, the guy that we thought would be a pretty important physical presence on defense, was, I think, suspended twice, or kind of didn't held out twice at some point in the season. And I just don't get those vibes from this team where Danny made sure everything that he did wrong last season, he's doing right this season.
So last thing, I want to talk about who I think is going to be the biggest X factor on this roster, and it's JJ Mandiquit. This is the kind of guy who, even as a true freshman, can make such a big impact coming off the bench, in the starting lineup, whatever it might be, because he's got such great vision. He's such a great passer already, where one of the things that Danny kind of threw out on Tuesday when talking about JJ is he's just one of those, I always hate using this term because it is such a coach speak thing, but he's just a winner. And he said that when we do our scrimmages, when we do all that, we track wins, and JJ's team wins almost every single time. And it's one of those things where he just makes everyone around him better. You talk to any member of the roster, and they've pretty much everyone that we talked to over the summer already said, JJ is the best point guard I've ever been around. Having a guy like that to come off the bench and still, maybe give you 25, 30 minutes if need be, depending on, foul trouble, different things like that. Having a guy like that who can run the offense so seamlessly as a true freshman coming off the bench is something that should not be overlooked on this roster. And I think that he could be a major impact in this conference by the time the season is all said and done. But Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to every day for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple News, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.